President Trump standing behind his $1.776 billion anti-weaponization fund, even as Republican senators increasingly condemn the idea. And the controversy threatens to divide his party even further. Trump writing today on social media, quote, "I gave up a lot of money in allowing the fund," saying he could have settled his lawsuit against the IRS for $10 billion over his leaked tax returns for much more. The New York Times reported this week, we should note, that IRS lawyers had prepared several ways for the Justice Department to fight Trump's $10 billion lawsuit. They wrote this down in a 25-page memo passed on to the Treasury Department, although it's unclear if that memo ever reached the Justice Department. Ultimately, the Justice Department, which reports to Donald Trump, of course, never fought the lawsuit, leading to this highly unusual situation. Both Treasury and IRS did not respond to the New York Times request for comment, and the Justice Department did not tell the Times why it chose to settle this case the way it did.
All right, everyone. Jack. Here, so this is what just happened, guys. A full-blown revolt is exploding within the Republican Party as Trump's carefully constructed wall of unquestioning obedience crumbles, with long, loyal allies suddenly finding their voices in ways that seemed impossible just months ago. The walls are closing in, the cracks are widening by the day, and even seasoned observers are scrambling to grasp the magnitude of the political earthquake unfolding. The moment that crystallized this rebellion in the public consciousness came when a Republican senator looked directly at something this president is pushing, something he desperately wants, and declared publicly and on the record that it represents something deeply troubling. Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina called the president's nearly $2 billion anti-weaponization fund exactly what it is, a payout pot for punks. Those words, spoken by a sitting Republican senator about a president of his own party, represent a breach of the unwritten code of silence that has governed Republican behavior throughout this administration.
Sources tell CNN that the White House has no plans to change the structure of the fund, even after a fraught meeting on Capitol Hill yesterday between the acting Attorney General Todd Blanche and several upset Senate Republicans. The White House says the administration appreciated the feedback and looks forward to additional conversations as needed. Well, it looks like they will be needed. Senate Republicans abruptly left town last night without acting on key legislation, specifically Trump's immigration package. The White House is now feeling the full force of a furious majority. Former Republican leader Mitch McConnell rebuked the pitch, saying, quote, "So the nation's top law enforcement official is asking for a slush fund to pay people who assault cops? Utterly stupid, morally wrong. Take your pick," unquote. How about both? Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson is one of the few senators who has publicly supported the fund, but he does see its introduction on the same week as his key vote on Trump's immigration bill.
The fund in question, which we have documented extensively in our coverage, operates as a mechanism to secretly distribute taxpayer money to the president's political allies with absolutely no public disclosure of who receives the funds. It is a slush fund in all but name, and when Tillis used that language, he was not engaging in diplomatic evasion or procedural hair-splitting. He was naming the essential nature of what the fund represents with a directness that has been conspicuously absent from Republican discourse. The president's response to this act of defiance was immediate and predictable, a social media tirade labeling Tillis a rhino and a quitter, accusing him and his rhino friends of sabotaging the Republican Party. The irony dripping from these accusations is almost too rich to fully appreciate because the forces that are actually damaging the Republican Party right now have nothing to do with the senators who are finally speaking truth to power. The accumulation of spending controversies, the strategic failures on the international stage, and the bitter infighting that has consumed the party from within are the real threats to Republican electoral prospects.
Angering his party at the wrong time, saying, quote, "Somebody described it as a galactic blunder, and I think that's probably true," unquote. Joining us now to discuss, CNN's Lauren Fox and Paula Reed. Paula, what are your sources telling you about why the White House and the Justice Department are so dead set on sticking by this fund and the way it's being distributed, which is confidentially and anyone can apply? Despite the questions and the backlash.
They're true believers. Look, they have been swimming in this idea and this concept for years. It goes back to 2023 when Trump was thinking about taking back the White House. And anyone involved in the creation of this is either a Justice Department lawyer, a White House lawyer, an IRS lawyer, a Trump personal lawyer. These are the people that really believe that the president was mistreated while he was out of office, that he was a victim of the Justice Department, and other people were too. And they truly believe that once they pick these 5 members and the rules are laid out, that people will see why this is a good idea. But they put forth a ton of money, not a lot of details, and there's no reason that taxpayers should just believe, right, 5 as of yet unnamed people.
The approval rating for this president has plummeted to a stunning 35%. A number that should terrify every Republican strategist in the country. And the dysfunction on Capitol Hill has reached such a fever pitch that Senate Republicans departed for their Memorial Day recess without even voting on a $70 billion immigration bill they had been working on for weeks, a bill that was supposed to be one of the signature legislative achievements of the entire term. The full picture of what has triggered this revolt extends far beyond just the slush fund, as troubling as that fund is. There is also the extraordinary proposal from the White House for a $1 billion ballroom and East Wing expansion at the executive residence, a project that would be funded entirely by taxpayers at a moment when the president is simultaneously urging budget cuts across the rest of the government and demanding that Congress tighten spending on programs that affect ordinary working Americans. The hypocrisy is so glaring that even Republican senators, who have been remarkably tolerant of the president's excesses, have been unable to swallow it. One Republican senator, speaking to Bloomberg and declining to be named because apparently speaking the truth still requires anonymity in this political environment,
will protect this from becoming a feeding frenzy.
And they have refused to rule out that people who were convicted of beating up cops would get some of the money. They just
also an optics problem, yes.
Well, optics at the very least. And Lauren, you talk with these Republican senators day in, day out. Help us understand why else they're so frustrated with Trump's calculation here.
Yeah, I mean, this was a really tough week for Senate Republicans, in part because they saw one of their colleagues, Senator Bill Cassidy, ousted on Saturday night. Then you saw Senator John Cornyn, who was once the Republican whip in Trump's first administration. It was announced that his challenger was going to be endorsed by Donald Trump. And there was this feeling in the United States Republican conference in the Senate that if this can happen to John Cornyn, it can happen to any of them. And it really, I think, made a lot of Senate Republicans that I was talking to rethink how far they are willing to go for this administration, because there is a sense that there is no limit. And anytime you take this risk, there's a possibility that Donald Trump can come for you in the future if you cross him even in the slightest way. This was one of the Republican senators I talked to yesterday of Indiana, Todd Young.
Called the Ballroom and East Wing projects tone-deaf vanity in an era of high deficits. A Republican senator saying that about a Republican president's White House renovation plans, on the record, even if anonymously, represents a breach of the code of silence that simply would not have happened even a few months ago. Add the anti-weaponization fund and the ballroom together, and you are looking at nearly $3 billion in controversial spending that this president is trying to rush through a Congress that is already fractured beyond repair. The same Congress that is already dealing with a 35% approval president. The same Congress that is already watching fuel prices climb because of an ongoing conflict that independent analysts have described as a strategic failure. The same Congress whose Republican members walked out of Washington without voting on a major priority rather than have the fight on camera. The cancellation of that vote, the decision to simply leave town rather than confront the divisions within the party, speaks volumes about the state of the Republican coalition. Leadership did not pull the plug on that vote because they wanted to delay it. They pulled the plug because they were genuinely uncertain they had the votes, and uncertainty about votes on a priority Republican bill in a Republican-controlled Senate is a sign of a coalition under significant and measurable strain.
It is crucial to understand that this Republican revolt is not the beginning of the loyal opposition suddenly discovering constitutional principles they plan to consistently apply. Most of the senators involved in this rebellion are still supporting the president's broader agenda. They are still not pursuing the oversight investigations they should be running. They are still not using their institutional authority to check the executive branch in any systematic way. What is happening is more limited and more specific, a set of senators facing specific political pressures from specific constituents about specific items, pushing back on the things that are most politically indefensible in their own districts. The slush fund that could pay people convicted for their role in the January 6th attack, the billion-dollar ballroom, the war costs that are showing up in gas prices that voters complain about at town halls. These are the places where the Republican political calculus is breaking down, not because of principle, but because of political math. But the limited nature of this revolt does not make it politically insignificant, because the president's power inside the Republican Party has always operated on an assumption, the assumption of near total obedience. The assumption that even when Republicans disagree privately, they will not say so publicly. The assumption that the cost of crossing this president is always higher than the cost of enabling him. And when Tillis calls the fund a payout pot for punks, when unnamed senators tell Bloomberg the ballroom is tone-deaf vanity, when the Senate cancels votes and leaves town because the internal fight is too hot to manage, when the revolt is visible enough that major media outlets run segments on it and publish explainers asking why Republicans are revolting against their own president, the assumption of near total obedience breaks. Not completely, not permanently, but visibly. And visibility matters politically because it gives other Republicans permission. It tells swing district members that they can express concern without being the first person to do it. It tells donors and operatives and party strategists that the loyalty is not quite as automatic as it appeared. The centerpiece of this revolt is the anti-weaponization fund, and the receipts on why it is causing such specific discomfort within the Republican conference are more damning than even the Tillis quote suggests. The fund was created as part of a settlement in the president's $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS, with the stated purpose of compensating people who claim they were wrongly targeted by the DOJ under the previous administration. The framing of anti-weaponization, fighting back against political targeting, is designed to resonate with the base that has been convinced for years that the deep state was weaponizing law enforcement against the president and his supporters. As a political message, it is coherent within that framework. But the specific mechanism through which the fund operates, a 5-person commission appointed by the acting attorney general with no obligation to publicly disclose who gets paid, is what has Senate Republicans in open revolt. Because no disclosure means the money could go to anyone the administration considers a victim of political targeting, and in the category of people that definition encompasses, depending on how the commission interprets it, includes people who were convicted for their role in the January 6th Capitol attack. Tillis said it plainly, payout pot for punks. He was not using diplomatic language or hiding behind procedural objections. He was naming what he saw as the essential nature of the fund, a mechanism to route taxpayer money to people whose conduct even many Republicans are not comfortable openly defending. The political problem for Republican senators who represent states where the January 6th attack is not universally celebrated as legitimate political action, which is most states, is obvious. A vote to fund January 6th rioters is not a vote most of them want to cast. A vote to approve a $2 billion fund that could pay those rioters is almost as bad. And when the president responds to their objections by calling them rhinos and quitters on social media, he is not solving their political problem. He is adding to it, because now they are the targets of presidential attacks for objecting to paying January 6th rioters, which is its own kind of uncomfortable position. The president's attack on Tillis, the rhino and traitor language on social media, reveals something fundamental about how he processes internal Republican pushback. Republicans who object to specific things this president is doing are not engaged as colleagues with legitimate concerns to be addressed through normal legislative negotiation. They are labeled as traitors to the party, enemies of the agenda, people to be punished and replaced. That response, which worked as an intimidation strategy when the president's approval was high and his hold on the base was total, is becoming less effective as the political environment shifts. A senator who is looking at a 35% presidential approval rating and gas prices elevated by an ongoing conflict and constituents asking why taxpayer money is going to a ballroom and a slush fund. That senator's calculus about the cost of crossing the president is different from the calculus when the approval was higher and the mandate seemed more solid. The threat of being called a rhino is less terrifying when being associated with the object of criticism is also a political problem. The ballroom and East Wing expansion deserves its own moment because the optics of it are genuinely extraordinary in the context of the administration's broader messaging. This president has positioned himself as a budget hawk, as a cutter of wasteful government spending, as the leader who is going to reduce the deficit and make government leaner and more efficient. The anti-bureaucracy messaging, the civil service buyouts framed as streamlining, the general posture of spending less and doing more with it, these are the themes the administration has been selling. And then the president wants a billion-dollar ballroom at the White House, funded by taxpayers. At the same time, gas prices are elevated by the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, and Americans are being told that the economic disruptions are necessary sacrifices for strength and security. The tone-deaf vanity characterization from the unnamed Republican senator is not hyperbole, it is an accurate description of how the ballroom project reads against the backdrop of everything else the administration is asking the public to absorb. You cannot simultaneously ask working-class voters to accept higher fuel costs as a price of strength while using taxpayer money to build luxury amenity spaces in the executive residence. The cognitive dissonance is too large to paper over with messaging. The canceled Senate votes are the most concrete expression of the dysfunction, because legislative votes that do not happen are legislative priorities that do not advance. The $70 billion immigration bill that Senate Republicans walked away from without voting on was supposed to be one of the signature legislative achievements of this presidency. Immigration has been a central and defining issue of this president's political identity. And the intra-party revolt over the weaponization fund and the building projects was so acute that Republican leadership decided the fight was too hot to manage and punted the entire week's legislative agenda. That is not a minor scheduling adjustment, it is the acknowledgement that the coalition is too fractured on too many fronts simultaneously to execute the agenda. The timing of this, leaving Washington without a vote on a major priority bill as the Memorial Day recess begins, sends its own signal. Leadership does not pull the plug on a major vote unless they are genuinely uncertain they have the votes. The canceled vote is not just a delay, it is an admission that the numbers were not there. And numbers that are not there for a Republican priority bill in a Republican-controlled Senate are numbers that reflect the state of the coalition, which is to say, a coalition under significant and measurable strain. The approval number is the context that ties everything together, and it is more alarming for the administration than the 35% headline suggests when you look at where the movement is coming from. The approval dip shows GOP support slipping, specifically as the ongoing conflict drives up fuel costs and energy prices. That is not a general erosion across the board, that is Republicans, people who voted for this president, who support his agenda broadly, souring on the administration because of the specific economic impact of the conflict. This is not opponents moving further into opposition, this is supporters cooling, because the promises are not being kept in the ways that affect their lives most directly. Gas prices, energy costs, the daily visible economic impact of a conflict that was supposed to demonstrate American strength and is instead demonstrating that American strength costs real money that real people are paying every time they fill their tank. And that specific source of the approval erosion, own coalition members frustrated by the material consequences of the strategy, is exactly the kind of feedback that motivates Republican senators to start calling slush funds payout pots for punks, because they are hearing it from their constituents, and they are calculating that the political cost of silence is starting to exceed the political cost of speaking. The Jesus Post controversy deserves analytical attention because of what it reveals. Representative Dan Newhouse, a Republican from Washington State, appeared on Sky News Australia and called the president's social media post pairing himself with Jesus very unsettling. That is a Republican congressman using the words very unsettling to describe the behavior of his own party's president on international television. Not about a policy decision or legislative fight, about the religious imagery the president is deploying, the grandiosity of the self-presentation, the messianic quality of the branding. And the fact that Newhouse said it on camera to an international outlet suggests he calculated that the discomfort was real and widespread enough that naming it carried less political risk than he might have expected even a year ago. Because the 35% approval and the canceled votes in the slush fund revolt are not just legislative problems, they are symptoms of a political environment in which the normal constraints on Republican dissent are loosening. The cost of speaking is lower when the president is already at 35%. And the very unsettling characterization from Newhouse is one data point in a broader pattern of Republicans concluding that the cost of continued silence is now higher than the cost of saying something. The approval number is the most important factor in this equation, not because 35% is historically unprecedented for any president at any point in their home, but because the 35% number for this president specifically comes from a base that was supposed to be unmovable. This president's political identity was built on the claim, and to some extent the demonstrated reality, that his core supporters were more loyal than any other presidents that the base would hold even when mainstream approval collapsed. That 35% nationally could coexist with solid Republican support that would protect him from the kind of intra-party challenges that weakened other presidents. What the approval dip shows is that the 35% is coming partly from that base eroding, from GOP support specifically slipping, as the conflict drives up the costs that Republican voters experience every day. When the base starts to slip, when the voters who were supposed to hold regardless of anything start responding to economic pain with softer approval, the political protection that base solidarity provided to Republican members who were considering whether to criticize the president starts to diminish. The member who was afraid to cross the president because the base will follow the president against them now faces a base that is less uniformly mobilized behind the president and more open to criticism. The 35% is not just a data point about the president's popularity, it is a shift in the political environment that enables everything else we are describing. The slush fund, the ballroom, and the canceled votes together constitute the most visible public evidence that the governing coalition is not executing its agenda effectively. That visibility matters enormously in an election environment where the story being told about each party is being formed right now. Republicans came into this term with the argument that they had a mandate, that they had a plan, that they were going to govern effectively and deliver results. The picture being generated right now, canceled votes, senators calling the president's fund a payout pot for punks, leadership pulling the plug on a major immigration bill rather than risk losing the vote, unnamed senators giving quotes about tone-deaf vanity is not the picture of effective governance with a coherent mandate. It is the picture of a fractured caucus managing a president whose personal projects and legal settlements are eating up political capital that the party needs for the agenda it was elected on. That picture, which is being covered by major media outlets around the world, is the picture that political opponents in competitive districts are going to be referencing from now until Election Day, not because they have to invent the critique, because the receipts are on the record coming from Republican senators under their own names or barely disguised anonymity. The revolt matters most for what it signals about what comes next, not just for what it demonstrates about what is happening now. Republican senators are currently pushing back on the slush fund and the ballroom. They canceled votes on the immigration bill. A few of them have made public statements. That is the current state of play. But the conditions that produce those actions, the 35% approval, the fuel costs, the accumulated frustration with a president who responds to every objection by calling the objector a rhino, those conditions are not temporary. They are not going to resolve before the midterms. The approval is not going to jump back to 50% while the conflict continues and the economic disruption persists. The slush fund scrutiny is not going to disappear. It is going to intensify as the legal and oversight questions around it develop. The ballroom is going to keep being a target every time a budget discussion happens. And the senators who defected on various votes, the senators criticizing the slush fund, and the representatives calling the president's religious imagery very unsettling, are all part of a permission structure that is widening. Each public break makes the next one slightly easier. Each canceled vote makes the next member slightly more comfortable saying the coalition does not have the numbers. And as the midterms approach, the political calculation for individual members sharpens. The question of what is most dangerous to their re-election becomes more urgent and more specific. And the willingness to break on specific issues where the president's position is most politically indefensible is going to increase. We are watching the beginning of a process, not the end state of one, and the trajectory of that process, more defections, more canceled votes, more payout pot for punks moments, is the trajectory that defines what the Republican Party looks like heading into the upcoming elections. The conflict and fuel cost connection is the one that makes the slush fund revolt legible beyond Washington politics. Senators do not publicly call a president's fund a payout pot for punks in a political vacuum. They do it when they are hearing something from the constituents they represent. What Republican senators are hearing is the specific economic frustration of people who voted for America first and are instead experiencing elevated gas prices while the president builds a ballroom. The connection between the conflict and fuel costs is direct and documented. The situation is creating oil market disruption that feeds through into gas prices at every station in every state. Gas prices are the most psychologically visible consumer price. People see them every time they drive past the gas station. They think about them every time they fill up. They connect them directly to the economic environment in a way they do not always connect other prices. For Republican voters who expected energy independence and lower costs, who were promised that American energy dominance would translate into cheaper fuel.
The elevated gas prices from the conflict are a daily visible reminder of the gap between the promise and the delivery. Senators in states with high commute distances, agricultural economies that depend on diesel, manufacturing sectors with significant energy costs, those senators are hearing about it. The slush fund revolt is not just about the slush fund. It is about senators who are under constituent pressure, finding an issue where they can express that pressure without directly attacking the conflict strategy. The fund is the lightning rod, the conflict costs are the electricity, and the circuit between those two things explains why the revolt is happening now at this level of intensity. The cultural discomfort thread, the Jesus Post controversy, the very unsettling Newhouse quote, reveals something deeper about where at least some Republicans are in their relationship with this president at this point in the term. There is a slice of the Republican coalition, not the base, but the institutionalist conservatives, the evangelical Christians, who are genuinely uncomfortable with messianic self-presentation.
The small government Republicans who believe in constitutional limits, who have been processing a growing dissonance between what they thought they were supporting and what they are supporting. Low-level sounds are expelled. The cities rained open to the coastal city of Canada. What's up? Rains 5. The very unsettling response to the Jesus Post is the public expression of that private dissonance. It is a Republican congressman saying out loud on camera that something about how this president presents himself does not sit right, that the grandiosity, the messianic imagery, the claim to be a uniquely indispensable figure deserving of essentially religious devotion is not what conservatism is supposed to be about. That discomfort has been building. The Newhouse comment is not the first expression of it, and it will not be the last. As the approval number sinks and the political protection of being on the winning side erodes, more of that private discomfort is going to find its way into public statements because the cost of staying silent keeps going up, and the cost of speaking when other senators are already calling the fund a payout pot for punks and the coalition is visibly fractured and the approval is at 35% keeps going down. We are tracking every thread of this as it develops, the slush fund legal questions, the next votes, the revolt, the approval collapse. All of it is pointing toward the same deadline. The picture is going to keep getting clearer and more consequential the closer we get to it, and everything that is happening right now is setting the stage for a political reckoning that will define the Republican Party for years to come.